Hello everyone, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG and welcome to another Commander deck tech. We have a fun one for you this week. We're going to be looking at Thalia and the Gitrog monster. It is 1 white, black green for a 4/4 legendary creature human frog horror. It has First Strike and Death Touch, as well as you may play an additional land on each of your turns. It also has creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, as well as, whenever Thalia and the Gitrog monster attacks, sacrifice a creature or land and then draw a card. Thalia and the Gitrog monster is one hell of a creature. 4 mana, 4/4 First Strike Death Touch is insanely good. No one will be wanting to attack into this or block it. The First Strike and Death Touch combo means that it will kill anything that it gets into combat with. But it does not stop there. This card does so much more. Getting to play additional lands each turn will ramp us ahead and trigger a load of landfall effects. Creatures and non-basic lands coming into play tapped for our opponents will really slow them down, all while we pull further ahead. And then we even get card draw when it attacks, by allowing us to sacrifice a creature or a land to draw a card. So with all that said, this is primarily going to be a lands deck. We'll have powerful landfall cards that care about lands coming into play, as well as cards that reward us for when those lands leave the battlefield as well, so everything plays into each other and works really nicely. To win the game, we can either buff up the tokens that we'll be making, or use some powerful combinations of lands. One quick note about this video is that we will be going through all the individual sections that you need to make the deck yourself. We won't be giving a full deck list, rather a number of cards that you need in each section to make it work, and then a list of cards for you to pick from. Any card we mention will be down in the description below. Our ramp package seems like a pretty good place to start. Because of everything this deck is going to be doing, this is going to be a heftier section than a regular deck, so I'd recommend at least 12 bits here. First up, we have effects that let us play multiple lands in a turn. These are fantastic at letting us really ramp in the deck. We'll also be running some cards that let us play lands from our graveyards, which combined with Thalia and the Gitrog monster's ability to sack lands, as well as a bunch of other effects that we'll be running, will mean that we'll really be able to make the most out of this. Because of reprints and newer cards like Druid Class being printed, this section is nowhere near as expensive as it used to be. What also goes great with multiple land drops in a turn is a card like Lotus Cobra, which can make us a bucket load of mana. In a similar vein to the Cobra, we have Tireless Provisioner. While this technically can make food to gain us some life, it can also importantly make us treasure whenever we put a land into play. Absolutely perfect for us to store up and use to cast a big spell. Next up, we have some effects that go through our deck to get basic lands out, while also putting a land we control into the graveyard at the same time. In this build, cards like Harrow, Roiling Regrowth, and Springbloom Druid are everything that the deck wants to be doing and will really help tie the deck together. After those, we have some more standard Rampaging Baloths effects. I personally want to run Nature's Law and 3 Visits here, as they can also go and get any dual lands that you might be running, including the Abzan Triumph, so they are fixing as well as ramp. Then we have Cultivate and Kodama's Reach. I have found myself running these less in recent years, but in a deck that runs cards that lets us play multiple lands in a turn, and a load of landfall effects, just having more lands in your hand is going to be really useful. The main thing with these is keeping an eye on how many basic lands your deck actually has, as we will also want to be running a lot of utility lands. Next up is a package of cards that care about lands going to and from the graveyard. This is really what will help push the deck to the next level. First, we have some tutor effects that importantly let us sacrifice lands. Crop Rotation and Elvish Reclaimer can go and get any land that we want, which when we get to our win cons and our utility land section, you'll see how impactful this can be. Knight of the Reliquary can also tutor up any land that we want, but does require us sacrificing a forest or plains. That downside is negated a little bit by it having the potential to becoming a huge beater, so we love that. Next is Zuran Orb. This is a free, repeatable sacrifice outlet for our lands. The fact you can find it off of Urza's Saga as well is very nice. So with those previous cards we've been putting lands into our graveyard, the next part of the engine is cards that let us bring them back. This way we can continually loop lands from the battlefield to our graveyard and back again, causing all our landfall and lands leaving the battlefield effects to trigger over and over again. While Crucible of Worlds and Ancient Greenwarden are pretty pricey, cards like Ramunap Excavator, Conduit of Worlds and Perennial Behemoth are all way cheaper and do a fantastic job. They really will just tie the whole deck together really nicely. Next up, we have cards that make us a board state when those lands either come into play or leave the battlefield. These will give us all the power and toughness that we need to actually push some damage through. There is just a really solid selection here. The standouts are probably Scute Swarm, Rampaging Baloths and Avenger of Zendikar, but there are plenty of options here to suit anyone's budget. The ones on enchantments are also really nice, with things like Felidar Retreat and Retreat to Emeria, as they won't die to a board wipe. Then we also have Field of the Dead, which will make us a bucket load of tokens very quickly, while also being easy to find off of our land tutors. Then we have Turntimber Sower and Titania Protector of Argoth. These make us creatures whenever a land we control leaves play, and the fact that Titania makes 5/3s is extremely strong. Moving on, now we have our card draw section, and like with most decks, we're looking to run between 8 to 10 bits here to keep the deck ticking over. First up, it's hard to not start with the OG Gitrog monster. This is basically another copy of our commander in this deck, but the card draw line will be especially fantastic here as it's not limited to one card a turn. Then, like in any deck running spells that let us play multiple lands per turn, Horn of Greed is a great way of us drawing extra cards. Yes, this is symmetrical, but we are a lands deck, so we'll make way more use out of this than any of our opponents will. Next up, we have cards that let us play lands from the top of our library, with things like Augur of Autumn, Courser of Kruphix, and Oracle of Muldaya. These all do additional things that can help out the deck by themselves, but being able to play lands on the top of our library is a form of card advantage and is a great way to help us churn through the deck. Next up, we have Braid's Arisen Nightmare. This lets us sacrifice one of our tokens, or better yet, one of our lands. When we do, our opponents can either do the same, or they lose 2 life and let us draw a card. People generally don't like sacrificing their lands, so we should easily get a couple of cards off this every turn. Moving on, we have Tireless Tracker, which makes us a clue token whenever a land comes into play under our control. Perfect for us to use any spare mana to turn into cards. Then we have Nissa Vital Force, which is a very solid planeswalker that we can protect with our tokens. Importantly, it can ultimate the turn after it comes down, giving us an emblem that whenever a land comes into play under our control, we draw a card. Absolutely perfect for the deck. Then rounding this section off, we have some bits of one-time card draw, with things like Night's Whisperer, Deadly Dispute, Painful Truths, and Harmonize. Very solid and pretty cheap as well, and a great way of keeping your deck ticking over. Next up, we have our interaction section. Like with most decks, we want to start with 8 bits and go up from here. In these colours, we have plenty of options available to us, so you can really run whatever you want. Where possible, try to make them cheap to cast, or answer a wide range of things. Same with your board wipes. You can go for tried and true bits here, or spells that also wipe artifacts and enchantments. Basically, run the best cards you have. Next up is a little bit of protection. While our commander won't be dying in combat anytime soon, that may mean it becomes a target for our opponent's removal spells. First up, we have Sylvan Safekeeper, a great free sack outlet for our lands that can give our commander or any of our key creatures Shroud until end of turn. Then we obviously have Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, always solid at protecting a commander. And then one last additional bit of protection, this time for our own life total, with Constant Mists. This is a repeatable fog that we can continually return back to our hand with that buyback cost of sacrificing a land. Sacrificing lands is a thing that this deck wants to be doing, so forever not taking damage will make it really hard for opponents to actually kill us. Next up we have some reanimation, always nice to run in any commander deck. First up we have Emeria Shepherd, which I will admit is a little pricey to cast, but once it's in play, we'll be repeatedly returning cards from our graveyard to our hand, and then as we're in black, you have some of the best one-time bits of recursion available to you. Perfect for bringing back a key card or a win condition back into play. Talking of, let's go over some dedicated ways for this deck to actually win the game. First up is by buffing up all of our tokens to make them a lethal threat. First in this, we have Pattern of Rebirth. Stick this on any of our creatures, and then when we swing out, we can sacrifice the creature it's attached to our commander. When it dies, Pattern of Rebirth will tutor up any creature out of our deck, like an End-Raze Forerunners or a Crater Hoof, that will then buff up our whole team so the game ends on the spot. We can also kill people with some lands, with cards like Obnixilus the Fallen. Whenever a land comes into play, we ping a player for 3 life, while also making Obby get all the bigger. This actually adds up way quicker than you think. We also have a slightly smaller version of this with Retreat to Hagra. The fact this pings out every player means that in a 4-player game, the output at first is actually the same. Spread the love and all that good stuff. Next up, we have Titania, Voice of Gaia, and Argoth, Sanctum of Nature. Both very solid cards in this deck by themselves, but when they meld into Titania, Gaia Incarnate, you know that you are going to have a good time. This double-sized Avatar of Death should have no problem taking a player or 2 out of the game by itself. But on top of it being a massive creature, it also brings back all the lands from our graveyard into play, triggering all of our effects. That effect will be so powerful, we have some other ways of doing it as well, with cards like Splendid Reclamation, World Shaper, and the Mending of Dominaria. These cards go great with our free, repeatable land sacrifices, as we can get rid of a whole board of lands and then bring them back and everything else in the bin all in one go. One last win con, and we have Armageddon, which destroys everyone's lands. No one likes land destruction if it's just going to make the game last another hour. I'm looking at you, Cyclonic Rift. But in this deck, where we have cards like Titania that makes 5/3s whenever land goes to our graveyard, and bountiful ways of us bringing back all of our lands in one go, I think Armageddon is a legitimate win con in this deck. You'll know if you or your playgroup want this card, and if it's all okay, I think it'll be really good. Rounding off the deck with some utility lands, and we have a number of cool effects that we can run to help tie everything together that we're doing. First up, we're continuing the land destruction with Strip Mine and Wasteland. These can be very oppressive with the recursion and multiple land makers that we'll be running. But if I'm honest, I do think cards like these are underplayed in Commander. There are just so many strong utility lands out there and greedy mana bases that I think should be kept in check. These are perfect for that. Strong lands, for example, like Dark Depths and Thespian Stage, which when combined create a 20/20 Squidly Fish, perfect for taking out an opponent or two. We also have a Marit Lage at home with Westvale Abbey. 9/7, flying lifelink indestructible haste is still nothing to be sniffed at. We then also have Lotus Field, which can help generate us some extra mana, while also putting some lands in the graveyard ready for us to just play again. Then we have some more ways to buff up our tokens, with a card like Caverny Township, as it can put a counter on each creature that we control, helping them to grow all the bigger. Then for some protection, we have Glacial Chasm. This will genuinely be one of the best cards in the deck. We can pay the upkeep cost a couple of times, but then in this deck we can just not pay it one turn, it'll go to the graveyard, and then we can just replay it all over again. One quick thing to flag before we get you all out of here. I am currently recording this video about a month before March of the Machine actually comes out. While I'm not expecting there to be massive changes to this deck, there may be a couple of cool land cards from that set and from any future sets as well that you might want to look out and consider. So if there are any slam dunk cards from March of the Machine that I have missed, I will put them in the tapped out link down in the description below. But until next time, thank you all very much for watching, please like, share and subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.